and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And we have a lot of news.
We do, but we should remind those of you who are seeing us through Free Speech TV that this is the end of their pledge period. We go back to normal programming over several days each week, starting next week.
And next week is a big week. That's when the Supreme Court's going to be taking up the same-sex marriage cases, and we're going to be telling you how you can participate in demonstrations across the country starting this weekend, I think.
But we want to tell you at the top of the show that the Supreme Court is doing something it doesn't usually do, which is releasing the audio of the arguments from the courtroom and transcripts of the arguments on the day of the arguments. So next Tuesday by 1 p.m. they will have the Prop 8 case transcripts and audio, and Wednesday by 2 p.m. they will have the DOMA case audio and transcripts, and you can access those at supremecourt.gov. supremecourt.gov on Tuesday and Wednesday afternoons. I can't wait to hear what questions the justices ask.
It sounds rather exhausting. I think I'm just going to wait to hear what happens on Gay USA. And this week on Gay USA, yes. Well, and this is all with the court case coming up, Rob Portman is the first Republican U.S. senator to come out for same-sex marriage, and he did it because his college-age son came out to him 2 years ago.
He took a little while to think about it. But House Speaker John Boehner is still thinking. He's a good friend of Portman's, but he's sticking to his anti-same-sex marriage position.
And Hillary Clinton, who must be watching our show, has also decided to come out for same-sex marriage before the Supreme Court case is argued.
Yeah, and Portman's a little weird on that. We'll get to that. And the whole Republican Party is starting to debate whether to be nicer to women, LGBT people, and immigrants. But they haven't done anything about making any changes in their platform yet.
They don't want to do anything. The House, right across the street from the Westboro Baptist Church in Topeka, is sending a message of tolerance to the Phelps Klan and the Ku Klux Klan and the rest of the world.
The new Pope, who we told you last week had been chosen, but we didn't know who, and now you know everything about him because he's been all over the mainstream media. And they've told you that he's been particularly nasty when opposing gay rights.
It's the work of the devil. That's what he said.
He did. But there's also a story that he tried to, while he was trying to block marriage equality in Argentina, he offered this alternative of supporting civil unions.
Yeah.
Some people think that's a good sign. We're not so sure.
Okay. In AIDS news, a French study looks at the possibility that very early treatment with anti-HIV drugs may allow some people to go off their meds and still keep the virus at bay.
The trick is figuring out which people.
Yeah.
Singer Michelle Shocked used a San Francisco gig to tell her audience that, quote, God hates fags. Not a good idea. The negative repercussions for her career were immediate, but it's a very confusing story.
And I'll review a few plays, including one about the Stonewall Rebellion, just a stone's throw from the Stonewall. Holland Taylor's one-woman show about former Texas Governor Ann Richards, and we will talk about Christopher Durang's new play and how it fared in its transfer to Broadway with Sigourney Weaver and David Hyde Pierce. They're not guests on the show. We're just going to talk about their performances. Don't get all excited.
And the other people in the play who I liked even more.
Yes. Okay.
But let's start with the Republican senator from Ohio, Senator Rob Portman, who, much to everyone's surprise, announced that he has changed his position and came out for same-sex marriage.
This was big news. I mean, they led with it on the news all over the place. And
well, he did it in the middle of the CPAC conference, and that left a target-rich audience of CPAC attendees to be asked about it.
So in this clip that we're going to show you, he explains why he did it.
Okay, let's look at Senator Portman.
My son is very close to me and to my wife, and he had worked on the campaign, and so we got even closer during the campaign. And he came to me as a college freshman and said, after the campaign was over, after I was already elected to the Senate, that he wanted to tell us that there was something about him we didn't know, as well as we thought we knew him. And it hasn't, of course, changed our view at all of him.
What was your reaction when he told you?
Love, support, 110%.
Surprise?
Surprise, yeah.
You had no idea?
No idea, yeah. And, again, that launched a process of rethinking the issue. And talking to him, I also have gay friends and gay neighbors, as most people do. And, just going through this rethinking of it, led me to do a lot of reading and, again, spend time with some folks who I respect, who, my own pastor and other religious leaders, and just thinking about it. And I've come to the conclusion that for me, personally, I think this is something that we should allow people to do, to get married and to have the joy and the stability of marriage that I've had for over 26 years. I want all three of my kids to have it, including our son, who is gay.
So Republican leaders have been barred from talking to their children anymore, according to Andy Borowitz of The New Yorker. Anne found that story, and it's very, very cute. And you can look it up in The New Yorker.
It was. Well, a lot of people's first reaction was, oh, if only the Republican senators had children who were poor and hungry and in need of medical care.
Exactly. And, look, there have been a lot of complaints as why don't Republicans have empathy for anybody else other than their own kids? Look, sometimes they don't have empathy for their own kids. We're going to get to that with John Boehner.
Well, there are also liberal Democrats who don't always have empathy for their gay children
or
when
themselves.
They come out to them. Oh, yes.
Like Barbara Mikulski,
Yes.
who voted against same-sex marriage in 1996.
Exactly. So, and who still hasn't come out. So it is a mixed bag, but it is, the more I watch this, the more I'm sort of happy to see a sitting Republican senator say this, because that is making a great leap in this age when Republicans have been held to a very firm standard.
And we'll see if that's the kind of issue that it's going to bring him a Tea Party opposition primary, which is what they're always worried about. But I don't think it's the thing the Tea Party cares about particularly. They're more on crazy economic issues, I must say.
Yes.
But
there are some confusing threads to this story. First of all, he said that he chose this time to come out because the Supreme Court cases were coming up. But then he said he doesn't think this is an issue for the courts. It should be for the people to decide. States should decide. And they should have votes, and people should vote on people's civil rights.
And that is outrageous. I mean, I heard him say that in this interview, and it's like, don't you know how that is what tears families apart by having this debated in the public and everybody having to vote on it? It tears everybody apart. That's what a Republican in Wyoming said in stopping the vote there.
Well, we'll see whether he evolves further on that, but it was at best a confusing message. He says he talked to people he respected, and he talked to his pastor and other pastors. He also talked to Dick Cheney, evidently, and got a little advice on being the father of a gay or lesbian or bi or trans child.
Now, Dana Bash, who did that interview, broke this story. She also asked him if he had told Governor Romney when he was being interviewed. He was considered the front runner to be the vice presidential candidate.
Right.
And he said he did, and he said he didn't make any difference. And she goes, how do you know that?
Well, the Romney, the woman who was the chief spokeswoman for Romney and a high advisor.
Yeah, she said it didn't make any difference either.
And she's a signatory on the Republican amicus brief to the Supreme Court. But it is hard to imagine that it didn't make a difference because if for nothing else, then Ohio was very close, and much closer than Wisconsin, where Paul Ryan was from. And so you'd think they might have gone for Portman on that basis.
As long as you don't come out about your gay son. Did we run the picture of the happy family, the happy Portman family
The
there?
three children,
With
the
three
two
kids
straight ones,
and all that
the,
stuff. There they are. That's their
yeah.
Christmas card, I imagine.
The gay son is the one in the check shirt in the middle and the back.
Yeah, we don't know about the dogs.
But what we do know about is a lot of the reaction from Republicans who were asked about their reaction to.
It put them on the
Portman's commission.
spot.
It did, and a lot of them said, I will not refuse to talk to Rob Portman anymore. But none of them were really willing to step up beside him.
Let's run the interview with John Boehner on the ABC This Week show.
Yeah.
There was a surprise this week. Senator Rob Portman, who is a close friend of yours, a conservative from Ohio, said he has had a change of heart about gay marriage. He will now support gay marriage after learning his own 21-year-old son, Will, is gay. Had Portman shared this with you?
He has, in fact, called. Listen, Rob's a great friend and a longtime ally. And I appreciate that he's decided to change his views on this. But I believe that marriage is a union of a man and a woman.
Can you imagine yourself in a situation where you reversed your decision, as Portman has, on gay marriage if a child of yours or someone you loved told you they were gay?
Listen, I believe that marriage is the union of one man and one woman. It's what I grew up with. It's what I believe. It's what my church teaches me. And I can't imagine that position would ever change.
I grew up with, segregation and, women being, not given equal roles in society. Come on. That's not a good reason for doing anything.
It was also interesting how Portman sort of twisted himself into a pretzel by saying that he had been raised with this religious mandate that it was just a man and a woman, but now because of his religious faith, he supports same-sex marriage because of openness to all or whatever.
Well,
they so contort themselves.
Has anybody asked him whether he supports the Employment Non-Discrimination Act now?
That question has been raised among us. I don't know that it's gotten to him yet. I was interested in watching some of the CPAC conference to see some of those reactions. Senator Marco Rubio also getting a little hysterical. Just because I believe that states should have the right to define marriage in a traditional way does not make me a bigot.
Oh, really?
Yes, it does.
And then there's Governor Jeb Bush, speaking at the convention, saying, "Never again can the Republican Party simply write off entire segments of our society because we assume our principles have limited appeal. Way too many people believe Republicans are anti-immigrant, anti-woman, anti-science, anti-gay, and anti-worker." Duh. You are. That's because you are. And just saying this sentence isn't changing anything. And that's what we're saying. We want to see some substance and coming around. I mean, maybe they'll do a little bit on immigration. I don't know if they're going to do anything on this issue.
I'll give you, yes.
Phyllis Schlafly ain't going to stand for it.
Yeah, but here's the good sign. Believe me, I'm grasping at straws here, but at the CPAC convention, Donald Trump, Brian Brown of the National Organization for Marriage, and all of that ilk had tiny little audiences.
Whereas the gay panel had a big audience.
It did. It was huge, standing room only.
The guy who, Jimmy LaSalvia, who was the head of Go Proud, which is a gay group, to the right of the Log Cabin Club, spoke to them and said, look, I'm not saying you're a bigot either if you don't just believe in same-sex marriage, but you got to stop hating gay people, which is what the party does.
Well, I think what they seem to be headed for at the moment, and more on this when we get to the Pope, is a little ratcheting down of the rhetoric. It doesn't mean that they're changing their policies.
Right. So,
I'm not trying to excuse them, but that's
they're escalating on abortion, against abortion.
Well, they're going back to that.
Yeah, and
because they're winning on that.
You think they'll drop their call for a constitutional amendment against same-sex marriage?
Maybe.
I don't know if their base will let them do that.
Well, actually, what I fear most, you saw the report that Reince Priebus, the head of the Republican National Committee, released that said they have to get more progressive on this stuff.
It's an entry-level drug for young people to come to our party, being for gays.
They've read the polls. 58% of the entire U.S., according to the latest ABC News Washington Post poll.
Say that again.
58% of the U.S. population supports same-sex marriage. This is a doubling of the numbers in under 10 years.
And it's like it's like 72% of Democrats now support it.
81% of people under 30. 81%. So the Republican Party is looking at this and trying to make some decisions. But what I fear is what we talked about with Sarah Schulman a couple of weeks ago, which is pink washing. I can see a scenario where the Republican Party softens its rhetoric on gay people, but is still doing horrendous things on all this other stuff, and a certain segment of the gay population falls for this. You know, Jonathan Capehart goes on MSNBC and points out what we've reported before, which is that if the Republican Party had been more pro-gay in the election, Mitt Romney had a chance of winning.
Sure, 25%, an additional 25% of gay people said they would have voted for him if he wasn't bad on gay stuff.
That terrifies me.
Sure. Well, it saddens me that gay people, unlike, I will say, African Americans, Latinos, and Jews, who have basically stick as a progressive constituency, even when they make it.
Right.
Because they know what happened in the past to their people, and I hope we stay that way as a progressive people who remember our history.
Well, watch out for the Republicans because they're coming after us.
And then there's the Democrats.
Yes.
Hillary Clinton. This would have been the top of the news this week if Rob Portman hadn't stolen her thunder.
And we did last week here on the Gay USA television program urge Hillary to come out for same-sex marriage. So some of our viewers have been kind enough to give us credit for what follows. We don't.
It's okay. It's okay. But
we know others have been working with her for a long time.
We're going to show you Hillary's entire statement, which she issued through HR, the Human Rights Campaign.
Well, they have the same initials as her.
She has pointed out. She didn't give it an interview about this, where she could be sort of questioned about her evolution. So, but it is this broad statement of her support for LGBT rights, and we think you should see the whole thing. It's about 6 minutes.
A little over a year ago in Geneva, I told the nations of the world that gay rights are human rights, and human rights are gay rights, and that the United States would be a leader in defending those rights. Now, there were some countries that did not want to hear that, but I believe America is at its best when we champion the freedom and dignity of every human being. That's who we are. It's in our DNA. And as Secretary of State, I had the privilege to represent that America. I will never forget the young Tunisian who asked me after the revolution in his country how America could teach his new democracy to protect the rights of its LGBT citizens. He saw America as an example for the world and as a beacon of hope. That's what was in my mind as I engaged in some pretty tough conversations with foreign leaders who did not accept that human rights apply to everyone, gay and straight. When I directed our diplomats around the world to combat repressive laws and reach out to the brave activists fighting on the front lines. And when I changed State Department policy to ensure that our LGBT families are treated more fairly. Traveling the world these past 4 years reaffirmed and deepened my pride in our country and the ideals we stand for. It also inspired and challenged me to think anew about who we are and the values we represent to the world. Now, having left public office, I want to share some of what I've learned and what I've come to believe. For America to continue leading in the world, there is work we must do here at home. That means investing in our people, our economy, our national security. It also means working every day as citizens, as communities, as a country, to live up to our highest ideals and continue our long march to a more perfect union. LGBT Americans are our colleagues, our teachers, our soldiers, our friends, our loved ones. And they are full and equal citizens and deserve the rights of citizenship. That includes marriage. That's why I support marriage for lesbian and gay couples. I support it personally and as a matter of policy and law, embedded in a broader effort to advance equality and opportunity for LGBT Americans and all Americans. Like so many others, my personal views have been shaped over time by people I have known and loved, by my experience representing our nation on the world stage, my devotion to law and human rights, and the guiding principles of my faith. Marriage, after all, is a fundamental building block of our society, a great joy and, yes, a great responsibility. A few years ago, Bill and I celebrated as our own daughter married the love of her life, and I wish every parent that same joy. To deny the opportunity to any of our daughters and sons solely on the basis of who they are and who they love is to deny them the chance to live up to their own God-given potential. Throughout our history, as our nation has become even more dedicated to the protection of liberty and justice for all, more open to the contributions of all our citizens, it has also become stronger, more competitive, more ready for the future. It benefits every American when we continue on that path. I know that many in our country still struggle to reconcile the teachings of their religion, the pull of their conscience, the personal experiences they have in their families and communities. And people of goodwill and good faith will continue to view this issue differently. So I hope that as we discuss and debate, whether it's around a kitchen table or in the public square, we do so in a spirit of respect and understanding. Conversations with our friends, our families, our congregations, our co-workers, are opportunities to share our own reflections and to invite others to share theirs. They give us a chance to find that common ground and a path forward. For those of us who lived through the long years of the civil rights and women's rights movements, the speed with which more and more people have come to embrace the dignity and equality of LGBT Americans has been breathtaking and inspiring. We see it all around us every day in major cultural statements and in quiet family moments. But the journey is far from over, and therefore we must keep working to make our country freer and fairer, and to continue to inspire the faith the world puts in our leadership. In doing so, we will keep moving closer and closer to that more perfect union promised to us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Hillary.
Yeah.
And it's been pointed out that in 2004 and 2008, no major presidential candidate came out for same-sex marriage. There was some, Al Sharpton, Dennis Kucinich, but that's it. It was could not do it, including Obama. And now you have to be for it, or can't run in the Democratic primary.
Amazing. And it's been pointed out that was made to look like a campaign video. Yeah. People looked at it and said, she's running.
Well, she's keeping her options open.
Wow. Now, we do have the Supreme Court arguments on the Prop 8 case and the DOMA case next week on Tuesday and Wednesday. They're going to be a couple of hours each day in the morning. The full audio of the sessions, no cameras in the courtroom, but audio, will be released at 1 o'clock on Tuesday and 2 o'clock on Wednesday, plus transcripts. You can read the whole thing. You can go to supremecourt.gov on those days to get that material. But before the arguments, there are going to be vigils, demonstrations, rallies.
In every state in the Union.
Yes, and at the Supreme Court. And to get information about what's happening in your area, get a pen. You can go to lighttojustice.org.
It's lighttojustice.org.
Right, LIGHTTO justice.org.
And tell you what's happening. Some of those demonstrations are happening as early as this weekend.
Yes, on Sunday in New York City at 1 p.m., people will gather at the Stonewall Inn at Sheridan Square.
And march to Edie Windsor's house in Washington Square.
Yes, exactly.
She's the plaintiff in the DOMA case.
But she's already in Washington, so we won't be serenading her in
Well,
person.
Larry Kramer lives there too.
Yeah, can serenade him. And then, if you're still itching to demonstrate on this, at 7 p.m. in Times Square on Sunday, David Mixner is convening a candlelight vigil, so you can join him at 7 at Times Square.
And I think the breakthrough in the case is the fact that the chairman of the National Organization for Marriage, John Eastman, was recorded in a video. I don't have the video. Basically trashing Supreme Court Justice John Roberts' decision to adopt 2 children as second best. In other words, adopting, he says, certainly adoption in families headed like Chief Justice Roberts' family by a heterosexual couple is by far the second best option for children. Well, you are something, aren't you? And I hope he recognizes.
He thought he was saying a nice thing.
The scum that he's dealing with on the other side.
Roberts.
Yes, that these non-people are scum.
I am sure that John Eastman thought he was being very nice to John Roberts by saying that. All right, let's move around the country to the various states. And much to our surprise, marriage is breaking out in New Mexico, maybe.
Well, New Mexico has a gender-neutral marriage law. It doesn't
Yes.
forbid same-sex marriage. It never passed an amendment against it. And they've already recognized same-sex marriages from elsewhere.
Yes.
So the Santa Fe city attorney dug into the law and said, we should start doing them.
Yeah, let's call their bluff. Let's take them at their word.
So maybe you'll start seeing
Well,
that
here's
happen.
the thing. In 2004, they tried to do this. The city clerk actually issued 64 licenses to same-sex
Oh,
couples.
Sandoval.
Yes,
Yeah.
Sandoval County. But the state attorney general at the time shut them down and
Yeah.
said, no, you can't do this. Not for any good reason, because the law is gender neutral. But that was the decision then. And then in 2011, a different state attorney general by then said we will recognize the out-of-state marriages. But
Right.
no one has been willing to step forward. But now the mayor of Santa Fe has a lesbian daughter. There is a long-serving lesbian in the city council there, and they want to push ahead on this. And if they can't get the state officials to agree to it, they're ready to go to a lawsuit to sue for marriage rights in New Mexico.
Now, there is a lawsuit that's continuing in Illinois, right?
Yes,
While
we haven't heard anything
while
about
the
it.
legislature is still working on this. But the news about Illinois this week, besides hearing from a viewer who says we're working our hearts out here to get this thing done, is that the Obama Organizing for Action campaign, which is their follow-up to the campaign, where they mainly work on national issues that are of concern to him, are working in Illinois to try to get the same-sex marriage bill passed, and that is significant.
It's all about the House of Representatives in Illinois, where they are trying to get 60 votes for marriage. And they seem to be sort of tantalizingly close, but without the complete promised total. So they're not quite ready to take it to the floor. They want to be sure they can win it.
And of course, there's a group of African-American ministers in gear about this who are doing radio ads against it, led by former State Senator James Meeks, who used to be one of Obama's pastors.
And they're joining a large Catholic push on that, and a Lutheran Synod of, Missouri Synod crowd,
A conservative
too. Yeah.
part of the Lutheran Church.
Meanwhile, in Rhode Island, we are waiting to see what the Senate there does after the other house had already passed marriage. So this week there's a big hearing by the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is supposed to be the toughest test. They think if they can get it through the committee and get it to the floor, it will pass the Senate. And there have been some nefarious tactics tried, other bills introduced to take it to a voter referendum. or to do, actually, there's a proposal to do a constitutional amendment against same-sex marriage.
That wouldn't pass.
Absolutely not. But there are all these distractions and a lot of lobbying from the right and left on this. And
Surrender. Resistance is hopeless.
Well, Republicans are beginning to sign on to the same-sex marriage bill in Rhode Island. There is movement, and I think it's not unrelated to what's going on nationally.
And Lincoln Chafee, the governor, who's an independent, is thinking of becoming a Democrat, isn't he?
I don't know.
I
is
think
he?
so. Yes, I think I read that this week. Anyway,
the National Organization for Marriage is, of course, supporting the right-wing proposal.
Right. Now, in Vermont, they did, they were the first ones to do civil unions, and they do have same-sex marriage, but they passed a very important bill this year by a vote of 139-5, at least in the House, that says that, if you're a business doing business here, you have got to recognize these and provide benefits for these same-sex marriages. Even if you're from a company that self-insures or is from out of state and, just has a headquarter, has an outlet here, something like that. It's an effort to close a loophole. We'll see how it works out.
Well, the problem in all these cases has continued to be the federal government's Defense of Marriage Act, because it has allowed these companies that are operating their insurance programs under federal rules to not go by the state rules. So I don't know whether Vermont's passing this law will have an effect on that or not.
And congratulations to the Green Street United Methodist Church in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. They're not going to perform marriages between heterosexual couples until same-sex marriages are legalized in North Carolina.
They will perform marriage blessings, but they will not do legal marriages until all is equal.
Yeah, they won't sign the licenses.
Yeah. In Utah, there's a new group called Restore Our Humanity, which has announced that it will file a federal suit against the state constitutional amendment that bans same-sex marriage.
One of the first ones.
Yeah.
I think they did it in 95 or 6. I think Utah was the first one.
I don't remember, but it has always been my position that all these constitutional amendments are unconstitutional, and I have been itching for them to be challenged, the state ones as well as the federal one, the Federal DOMA Act, and I think we will win all those cases ultimately. Meanwhile, there's a little kerfuffle in Colorado. We told you last week that they had finally passed the civil unions law and succeeded in making civil unions legal in Colorado. So when this happened, the Denver Post, which is the main newspaper there, published a, I think, front page picture of the out gay House Speaker, Mark Ferrandino, kissing his partner in his office with a baby bottle sitting on his desk because they have a child. And then they were concerned about reader reaction to it. So on their blog, they posted this picture.
Did they pixelate it?
No. They put this headline under the picture. Picture of Mark Ferrandino kissing partner shows the truth, even if it offends some. But that was their correction. What? The original headline said, no matter how objectionable.
Well, I mean, believe me, showing especially...
did we show the picture?
I want to say, showing affection between men especially, they seems to unhinge people. And it's very, very difficult, even in shows that have gay characters, for the men to get it on.
Well, I know that people are particularly upset and
repulsed. Took them a long time on Smash.
But as we have pointed out, you have to get people comfortable by showing it. But for the paper to call this, no matter how objectionable is...
I did my bit about 20 years ago. I kissed my boyfriend on the show for 5 minutes straight, just to get you all used to it. Now you are used to it. Now I don't have a boyfriend. All right, let's talk about other news.
Let's do.
Cincinnati had its St. Patrick's Day parade, and last year they allowed GLSEN to march in it, and this year they said no.
The Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network.
But the organizers on the day of the parade said it wasn't because it was a gay group. It was because they wouldn't agree to our conditions that you not pass out literature and solicit on the sidelines of the parade. It's actually one of the rules of I think the Pride Parade in New York, too, to some extent. But anyway,
Someone else was quoted as saying they weren't allowed in the parade because it's an Irish Catholic parade. I think you could get a number of stories.
There was that, but this was the follow-up story anyway. Well, so Nick Clooney, who's George Clooney's father, who's a great liberal himself, was the Grand Marshal of the parade, and he said he cogitated over it, asked questions, and he did march because that's what he figured out. So we'll find out. Well, maybe we'll know more next week. Did you all have a shot?
He marched because he decided it was about handing out pamphlets?
No, he said it was not because it was anti-gay.
I think that is a false rationalization.
Okay, I like Nick Clooney.
A lot of politicians pulled out of the parade and did not march.
Yes, they did.
Yes.
That was the initial story.
And also to celebrate St. Patrick's Day, a gay activist from Ireland, Michael Barron, I think, who runs a youth agency called Belong To, with the B, L, G, and T capitalized, was invited to the White House for meetings as part of an Irish delegation in honor of St. Patrick's
I think it's the White House being conscious that there is this controversy across the country of St. Patrick's Day parades that exclude gay groups.
Yeah.
As they do and still do in New York, which had their protest against it. All right, and in San Bernardino County, the school district there is facing a lawsuit from the ACLU because of its persistent censorship of activities by the Gay Straight Alliance. When they do announcements about the group, they say the GSA, or they don't make the announcement at all. Things like that.
This is Sultana High School in San Bernardino County, California.
They also don't want to let young women wear tuxedos to the proms, or a young man who wants to wear heels with a tuxedo.
So they need to figure this out, or there will be a lawsuit from the ACLU. I am sorry to report that in Maryland, a Senate committee of the legislature rejected the proposed Gender Identity and Expression Non-Discrimination Act by a vote of 6-5. People had been hopeful about this passing this year in Maryland. There is an outside chance it could be brought directly to the floor, but I would guess not. And GLAAD, which used to be the Gay Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, but is now just GLAAD.
And now it doesn't stand for anything.
But it was created in 1985 to demonstrate against the New York Post. Well, they held their big awards in New York this last weekend, and they rejected a press pass request from the New York Post.
I don't know about that.
Because of their bigoted language. They use words like tranny and she-male in their headlines.
Well, they also gave their Best Columnist of the Year award to Frank Bruni of the New York Times, whose work is, I think, pretty good. Although this week he used a forbidden GLAAD word, homosexuals, describing us as homosexuals. I don't think we ever talk about ourselves as homosexuals on this show, do we?
Only with a touch of irony in our voices.
So, Frank, get with the program. And although I looked it up on the Times, apparently it occurs quite a bit.
Yeah. The New York State Assembly is moving forward the Gender Identity and Expression Non-Discrimination Act, but the New York State Senate is expected to once again kill it.
Which is controlled by Republicans and wacko Democrats who defected from the Democrats, to update you. We have good news from Topeka, Kansas, and bad news for the Westboro Baptist Church. Somebody bought the house, we have a picture of it, the house across the street from the Phelps Church, and they have painted it in rainbow colors there.
I particularly enjoy the snow.
And this is a guy named Aaron Jackson, and he said he was inspired by a 9-year-old kid who stood up to the Westboro Baptist Church, who held up a sign saying God hates no one.
Yeah.
And this group is called plantingpeace.org, and they're about all kinds of issues, but they're going to call this Equality House, and they said there's been no negative response to the color scheme.
And now they have duly...
Don't try that in New England where they have all those white houses. Oh, they'll go crazy.
Well, there are some very colorful houses in New England.
Historically, they were colorful.
And
but some of these neighborhoods now enforce this white only on the clapboard houses thing.
Clapboard.
Sorry.
Yeah, you can find that in a lot of places. I'm going to defend New England.
I'm going to clap the board.
They have dueling flagpoles at the Topeka house, too, because it turns out at the Phelps Westboro Church, they have a flagpole with the American flag and the rainbow flag flying upside down. My question is, how would you know the rainbow flag is flying upside down? So Aaron Jackson's put up a big flagpole, too. In New Jersey, a Senate committee, by a vote of 7-1, has approved a bill to ban conversion therapy for minors, which has been made law in California, but is held up by a court challenge at the moment.
Nobody's doing anything about that in New York.
Well, no, here's what they're doing in New York. The Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman, has told the National Football League that they cannot ask prospects about their sexual orientation because several potential recruits said they were asked, hey, you got a girlfriend?
It's an illegal question.
Do you like girls?
They can't even ask how old you are.
No. Or your gender.
Well, correct.
Yes.
Well, I guess not.
No, you cannot. It is illegal.
In job interviews, but the NFL is not a
gender neutral organization. I don't know if
I mean, you have.
There are women who have played on college football teams. I don't know if anyone's actually. I can't remember.
Usually, it's where they don't have a women's team.
Well, they don't have college football teams with women.
They don't?
No.
None?
Well, there is women's football.
Well, we'll hear from our viewers about this one.
Yes.
When I was on the bowling team at UVA, I bowled against Maryland. They had a woman on the team, and she beat me. Good.
Bowling is not football.
Well, there are also women's tours and men's tours and all those things.
Football.
I'm not advocating these things.
I
look for the time, and we're going to get to it with the Pope, I suppose, where all will be one.
Okay. Chipotle has canceled its sponsorship of a Utah Boy Scout Arama. They were supplying free food, but they have canceled that when it was pointed out to them what the Boy Scouts did.
In Fountain, Colorado, the Times did a big story about Coy Mathis, this transgender kid who, the parents had to take her out of school because the school's insisting that the kid use a separate restroom, essentially, because they consider her basically a freak. And, so the being homeschooled now. And then in Arizona, they've introduced a bill where they're going to make it disorderly conduct if you intentionally enter a public restroom, bath, blah, 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 for the exclusive use of persons of one sex, and the person is not legally classified on the person's birth certificate as a member of that sex.
You now have to show your birth certificate to
go
use
to
the bathroom. This is proposed in Arizona.
It's all about the bathrooms.
MSNBC, they're moving Ed Schultz off of the weekday. They're putting Chris Hayes in at 8 o'clock. And out-gay Steve Kornacki will take over Chris Hayes' weekend show, the weekend morning shows.
We told you that next week we'll be able to tell you about the debate on LGBT issues among the mayoral candidates in New York. John Liu got in the race this week. Chris Quinn, Bill de Blasio, and Billy Thompson are the other candidates there.
Air Force Major Mike Almy, who's been a great gay activist, has reached a settlement with the Department of Defense after they kicked him out years ago. He's going to get some money. He's going to get service credit. He was highly, highly honored and decorated, but he was discharged and fired, and, the whole half pay thing and everything. But now he works for a defense contractor doing exactly the same thing he was doing in the Air Force.
And making more money.
Yeah, I hope so. 30 major companies have sent a letter to the Gang of 8 senators who are negotiating an immigration reform bill. And these companies have asked these people to include LGBT binational families. And these companies are saying the Defense of Marriage Act is costing us money because our employees are now asking to be assigned overseas with their partners who can't stay in this country. And the list of companies includes American Airlines, eBay, Goldman Sachs, Google, Nike, Bain and Company, Barclays, Bristol Myers.
Wait till Mitt hears about that.
Cisco, Citibank, Dow Chemical, Intel. Marriott, the Mormon company, Merck, Texas Instruments is signed on to this. Okay. We'll see what immigration reform turns out to be.
Well, when we were taping last week, the white smoke was coming out of the Sistine Chapel, but we have a new pope from the Americas.
Habemus Francis.
Yes, Cardinal. He was Cardinal Bergoglio from Argentina. So, look, everybody by this time has got this impression of this more humble person, of this guy with a little bit more of a common touch, and he cares about the poor, supposedly, et cetera, and they kind of
They
like
had to go to Argentina to get an Italian.
They kind of like this. Well, that made him a bridge. His parents were from Italy.
Yeah.
They immigrated. So, but, and then, look, we looked into his record. There were a couple of things of great concern. When he opposed the same-sex marriage bill in Argentina, he didn't really issue this hateful statement. He wrote it to some nuns, and it got leaked. And he said it was the work of the devil, and it was going to be the end of the family. And that's all that hyperbole that the Catholics like to use, that it's going to be the end of society, which makes everybody think that, we're a threat to the family and all that kind of stuff. So bad stuff. Later in the week, we read that behind the scenes, he was actually trying to get them to do civil unions there. He couldn't get his fellow bishops to go along with this. Good luck as Pope.
Well, the other thing is the Times did a big story, front page story this week. The Pope was in favor of civil unions. Well, it turns out this is a little tactic that the church has used all across the U.S. and in other places to try to stem the tide towards same-sex marriage.
As have other right-wing groups.
Yeah.
But
and all their proposals for civil unions include things like, of course, if you are an individual with a business, you can discriminate all you want, whether you have any actual connection to a church or not.
So, I mean, the other rap on him, of course, is that he was the head of the Jesuit order in Argentina when the dirty war under the right-wing junta was happening there, when 30,000 people were being murdered by the government, including a lot of priests who were involved in liberation theology. What did he do? What we do know is he did not speak out about this. It would have taken some bravery to speak out about it, but he didn't. And the Catholic Church was also very much in favor of the right-wing takeover.
Well, he's accused of having actually fed a couple of priests to the junta.
He denies that.
He denies it, and he also says that he was secretly, quietly protecting some people.
Well, it reminds me of Pius XII during World War II, who did not speak out against the Nazi barbarism and allowed that to happen. And yes, behind the scenes saved a few Jews. Big deal, 6 million died. And in this case, 30,000 died. And that's what moral leaders are supposed to do when that kind of stuff is going on. But in the wake of this, he, criticized, many years later, criticized the barbarity of what happened, but also criticized the left-wing guerrillas.
He did, and he has been very critical of liberation theology. He's given credit for being charitable and conscious of the poor and fabulous, but not for systemic change that would in fact change anyone's circumstances.
What I worry about, when the last guy was, Ratzinger was made Pope, John McNeil, the famous gay theologian, said this is great because he's so rigid, it's going to turn a lot of people away from the structure of the church, which is this top-down, all-male thing. And I think it did. But if this guy is a nice guy and people can warm up to him, it's going to reinforce this very evil structure of all-male domination in the church.
Well, there's a lot that remains to be discovered. People warmed up to Benedict, for heaven's sake.
Oh, please.
They did.
And they didn't warm up to him. Well, except for gorgeous Georg, who still lives with him.
I wondered whether there were any gay rumors about this one, but we haven't heard anything yet.
Well, the Argentine
ears are pricked.
The Argentine gay group has condemned his appointment.
Yeah, and I think they would know. Well, what's interesting is that one of the people rejected was the Italian from Milan, who was expected to be more liberal.
Yeah.
So we'll see what this guy does. He not only did he come out calling same-sex marriage the work of the devil, he also said adoption by gay people is discrimination against children.
Yeah,
and there were other Argentine priests who supported the same-sex marriage law in Argentina and were defrocked for it.
Yeah, but they weren't ever going to get to be Pope.
Well, I want to know whether this guy will sell off some of the treasures of the Vatican if he wants to take care of the poor.
Just like in The Shoes of the Fisherman with Anthony Quinn. You can look it up on Netflix. That's what he does.
All right. And in Finland, the parliament will now consider same-sex marriage. They are the only Nordic country that does not have a same-sex marriage legalization law.
The parliament was not considering it, so they have
Exactly.
this citizens petition thing, and they immediately got the 50,000 needed. They have already got 100,000. By the time you watch this, they may have 200,000 people saying, let's do this.
Crashed the website when they put up this petition for same-sex marriage because it was so popular.
The Catholic bishops in the Philippines are fighting this new bill to allow birth control for the poor. Imagine that. And mandatory sex education in the schools. So it's going to the Supreme Court because it's being challenged there.
And in Seoul, South Korea, a court has ruled that 5 transsexual men can change the gender on their official documents, even though they haven't had the surgery. One has been living as a man for 23 years and will now actually get to have official documents saying that.
And the Venezuelan interim president, Nicolas Maduro, who had made some anti-gay statements, now says, if I were gay, I would proudly shout it to the entire world, he said. So he's trying to make up for some of his bad stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe, well, okay.
Whatever.
AIDS news.
All right, there's one big story in AIDS news this week, and it's very, very interesting and very complicated. Last week we talked about this child in Mississippi who was born to a mother living with HIV, and the doctors tested the child at birth for the virus, not for the mother's antibodies, which is what all children carry at birth, but directly for the virus, found the virus, started treating the child within 30 hours of birth with a triple combination drug dose, treated very aggressively and for some months, and then the mother and child disappeared. And then when they reappeared and they tested the baby, who they thought by this time would have had all this virus rebounding because she wasn't on meds anymore, suddenly they find the virus is totally suppressed without medication.
And they call that a functional cure.
They found particles of the virus still in the child, but not replicating as has traditionally happened when you go off drugs. So everyone goes, whoa, this is interesting but confusing. What's going on here? So this week, the French release a study that they have done of people who were aggressively treated soon after infection, within
14 people.
Well, they had a larger cohort of people who were tested, but they found 14 of them, which is only about 5 to 10%, had the same result as the Mississippi child. Off drugs, virus still there, but not rebounding.
Some of them had been getting the drugs for about a year. Some of them had been getting the drugs for 7 years, but they all had gone off the drugs.
Right.
And
the virus has not been eradicated from their bodies, but they are again calling this a functional cure because the virus is staying suppressed.
Now, 1% of people who are infected with HIV already are what they call elite controllers, meaning their bodies keep it in check basically naturally. These are now called post-treatment controllers, and they're different. And it says that while elite controllers are more likely to keep virus levels down even at the start, these people had it in the beginning.
Well, here's the deal. Early aggressive treatment, we now think, can have this result. Can. In a minority of the people in this study, 5 to 15%, they were saying. They're not even sure the exact number. But here's the thing. If you go off the drugs, you can create resistance to the drugs. So how do you know who to take off the drugs and when?
So what do they say?
Well, here's what we do know and what this study purports to tell us. Early diagnosis and treatment. Any chance that you have been infected, go on the drugs immediately, and you have a much higher chance of being able to suppress the virus with or without drugs. And that's the initial message coming out of this. And there will be much more study about how you figure out who you can take off the drugs and
even
when.
if you've had a situation where a condom broke or you got to stick with a needle or something like that, there's also post-exposure prophylaxis before the virus has any chance of getting hold.
Which is about taking these drugs.
Right. Which is not easy.
No.
But it's can save your life.
Yes, exactly.
Or save you from HIV infection.
All right.
In those cases. All right. I was moved by the note from Peter Staley this week that nearly 7,000 gay men still die from AIDS in this country each year. And while gay marriage is very important worth fighting for, where's the activism around AIDS? It's the biggest health care issue in the gay community. And he says we're getting rolled on AIDS policy these days with what Congress is doing and what the CDC spends on prevention targeting gay men. So we need to act up again.
Well, I think there is a movement to get more active again because people are reading these statistics about new infections and the fact that we're going to end up with half of gay men infected in a few years again.
Well, on April 6th at noon in Cadman Plaza, they're going to have a big rally called Keep the Promise in New York City to rally around all these issues.
Okay.
All right.
All right, on to entertainment news, where there was a little shocking news about Michelle Schacht, who you may or may not remember as a very popular sort of punky folk singer from some years ago. And she is back performing, and at a San Francisco show, at a little club, she did a first show that everybody loved, and then at her second show, she started this God hates fags kind of talk.
When they stop Prop 8 and force priests at gunpoint to marry gays, it will be the downfall of civilization and Jesus will come back.
Now there's some...
And then she said, did this God hates fags
people
stuff.
walked out, people yelled.
And they've canceled
They pulled the plug on her, the club pulled the plug on her.
They basically canceled her they have canceled now. Her entire tour has been aborted.
But it's confusing. She announced herself as a born-again Christian a few years ago. She said things like, I live in fear that the world will be destroyed if gays are allowed to marry.
Well, then she tweets this week, I'm neither against a woman's right to choose nor gay marriage. I'm a fundamentalist, though, so maybe, as you said, maybe she's off her meds.
Well, there were people in the room who thought she was being kind of ironic and didn't take offense. So without having been there and seen exactly what she said and how she said it, it's a little hard to judge, but she is certainly getting some blowback.
She is a member of Bishop Charles Blake's Church of God in Christ, who is a virulently anti-gay preacher. By the way, it's the church where Denzel Washington and Angela Bassett go in Los Angeles.
Charming. We have less than a minute. I have a couple other things, but do you want to throw some reviews at us?
Look, we saw Vanya and Sonia and Masha and Spike together. This is the Christopher Durang play I saw off-Broadway at Lincoln Center. Now it's on Broadway. It's really one of my favorite plays. I thought it was just sheer joy to sit through again for the second time.
I enjoyed it, and I sat through the whole thing, which is, unusual for me.
David Hyde Pierce and Sigourney Weaver, among others. Holland Taylor's doing this one-woman Ann Richards show. Yeah. It's got some gay content, and it's quite entertaining at Lincoln Center there.
But Holland Taylor is not out.
Oh, there you. Well, now she is.
Yeah.
Sadly, I saw Hit the Wall, the Stonewall play, and I can't recommend it. Sorry.
Out gay boxer Orlando Cruz won his second big fight after coming out with a rainbow flag on his boxing trunks.
Whoa.
Yeah. And you might want to check out the HBO Real Sports episode that's running now because it has a feature on transsexual basketball player Gabriel Ludwig.
I'm worn out. So much news. See you next week.
Supreme Court arguments, we'll discuss them next week.
Demonstrations.
Bye.
Bye.